All right. I am back with part two. Today is January 30th, a Friday, 2026. I'm not sure what I'm going to name these videos yet, but this is going to be part two. Now, in part two, let me do a literal metaphor. Something literal, but frame it as a metaphor. Okay. When I was around 15 years old or so, I got my first job and in a fast food restaurant. And this fast food restaurant was extremely popular because of the location. And to be honest with you, the food was actually really good. I don't remember the talk of diabetes or anything of that nature. And I used to eat plenty of that food, so I know. Our parents cooked, my mom cooked good meals, but then every now and then we were allowed to indulge in fast food restaurants. Is what they're calling them now. Fast food. But when I worked at that restaurant, the food was prepared at a reasonable rate. You had to wait till the stuff was fried and done, and you had to wait till the burgers were prepared properly at the right temperatures and blah 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 blah. And and as in other words, it was operating properly. Again, I don't remember being sick. There were times where I did not miss a day of work. The only time I would miss a day of work is because of my menstrual cycle. That's another topic. But anyway, so at this fast food restaurant, the food, like I said, the food was good, and this place was extremely crowded. So they decided to expand it somewhat. They expanded it because of the pressures of, I can remember when I worked in there, the lines were always long lines of people. Just it was insane. So I guess they decided, I don't know if this was decided before I got there or after I got there, I can't remember, but they installed what's called now drive-through. They had to improvise and install a drive-through. So as we know with the drive-through, it means literally what it means. Instead of having to get out of your vehicle to come into the restaurant, a lot of people would rather stay in their vehicles and da 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 da. I remember going back by that place because it's still there, by the way, some 50 years later, but it's still there, and it's a nightmare of traffic. But anyway, I'm talking about this for a reason, to explain something. So this drive-through, whoever was the owner of this particular restaurant, were a bit creative. They were creative enough to, because they wanted this drive-through installed. Because, like I said, inside that restaurant, it was a nightmare because it was packed, people everywhere. So with this restaurant, they kind of redesigned, the outside of their property of this restaurant. But inside the restaurant, they installed a conveyor belt. Now, I want you to pay attention to this part of what I'm attempting to explain about the conveyor belt. And see if you can read between the lines. How about that? So, when they installed this conveyor belt, sorry about that. I'm just looking up something real quick. Okay. Yeah, commercialized. But it says here, it's a continuous moving stripe or surface used to transport items from one place to another. Okay? Now, it's like moving. So what they had to do with this particular restaurant, something wasn't, they didn't have enough width, I guess, or something wasn't measuring up to where it was acceptable, I guess, via code, or, you know, whoever is responsible for how you can expand your building. So what happened was, which was kind of, it was creative, but it was very risky. What they did is they had a front restaurant, you know, a front facing restaurant, and they decided to build the drive-through in the back of the restaurant. Okay, in the back. And what connected the front of the restaurant to the back of the restaurant was conveyor belt. That conveyor belt, very ingenious. You know, I thought it was pretty interesting, actually. So what will happen is the front of the restaurant would prepare the food, put it on the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt would come through and come down to the drive-through in the back. And I used to work the night shift. And in the back of that restaurant, it was dark usually, not much lighting. And we were essentially like disconnected from the front, because in order to get to the front of the restaurant, you have to go through the warehouse, you know, where they were storing, the storage area, and da-da-da. So anything could have happened, just put it that way. And it did. Some things did happen. But I want you to focus on the conveyor belt. So visualize this. Say, for example, Michelle, Michelle, will order something. Okay? They in the front, they'll prepare my meal, put my name on it, put it on a conveyor belt, and it will come back to the back. There's a meal for Michelle. Okay, cool. So imagine that going at a certain pace. Michelle's order's there, John's order's there. Everything's kind of going at a smooth, and you know, everything was running smoothly in the beginning. But then, as time went on, because of the massive amount of people, the drive-through became a nightmare of traffic. Because vehicles were, you know, because the quality of the food started to change. And the reason for the quality of the food starting to change is because this particular restaurant was getting overwhelmed, growing with customers. But they were refusing to recognize that and consider other options. So in other words, this restaurant was so creative with the conveyor belt, everything else just kind of went out the window. So, and then the customer base was getting more intense, and people were getting extremely rude, and they wanted their food right now, you know, because it was supposedly fast food, and they wanted their food right now. They didn't want to hear no excuses. It became a battlefield when I worked in there, you know, attempting to make these people happy. These people calling them customers. You know, this particular restaurant had that crazy illogical motto, and we've heard this: the customer is always right. Okay, if that didn't cause a lot of toxic environment for workers, I don't know what you know. That saying that was the most toxic words to say to an employee, that the customer is always right. That's a bunch of bullshit. And then you have evidence to prove otherwise. Okay, being rude to us. You know, I'm a 15-year-old. And you have these usually they were older men come in there and, you know, be so disrespectful and be inappropriate as well. And I talked about how there was this one particular man, though, however, that used to come in there. And I guess he noticed how we were being treated, and he somehow zeroed in on me, and he became my protector for life. And I'll explain that another time. I did already, but that's not the point. So just picture the conveyor belt. My order's there. Bill's orders there. Everybody's order is there. The traffic is bottleneck. Literally, it was bottleneck. Okay. What was happening in the front of the restaurant, we usually didn't know in the back because, we're in the back. And I mean, there was a distance, okay? There was a distance. And we were basically by ourselves back there, in that drive-through. So what was happening is because the food was coming down to, because there was a bottleneck in the parking lot. Somebody was upset about something. Somebody was fumbling around in their purse to get the money, fumbling around trying to find the money to pay, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It became a nightmare with traffic, as I said. So the food kept coming down. The people would order, and they kept sending the food. Eventually, it became too much for the conveyor belt, and so all of that food started falling all over the place. All of that food started falling all over the place. And back then, they were not closing up the bags. Okay? So Jim's food would get mixed up with Michelle's food. So food was just everywhere. And usually there was, it started out, I think, with 2 workers back there. Eventually it became 1 worker. They started scaling back on workers. Even though it was massively, they were building up a massive amount of customers, but they were cutting back on the personnel, sending them home after a few hours. I told you how that's going to come back and haunt a lot of people for doing that. And it starts with management, of course. So they were attempting to have one person do enough work that 2 or 3 people should have been taken care of. One person should have been paying attention to how the food came down, make sure it was correct, close the bag, but one person was doing that. And then handling money, come on. They were not wearing gloves back then either, okay? Now picture this with our population. That's the point I'm attempting to make here. We are coming down the conveyor belt. Let's say, let's use that metaphor as we're delivering babies. The biological woman is giving birth to babies, okay? And there's a series of biological women giving birth, and they are piling themselves together, okay? Metaphor. In other words, they're overdoing it. What's the word here? It's this continuous movement. Okay, attempting to move births. Churning out births after birth after birth, because a lot of them were told, especially of religious dogmas, to continue to churn out babies after babies after babies after babies. Okay, eventually, and this is logical, eventually there's going to be an issue. There's going to be a malfunctioning. It's similar to what happened with the conveyor belt. Over time, the conveyor belt, because of the uses of it, was continually being used. It started to malfunction, and it started to not work. And then eventually they had to replace it and do a complete construction rebuild. So my point is, it was I thought it was ingenious in the beginning, because we had enough. It was flowing properly. It was flowing in the proper manner, considering the environment that it was in. The same thing with giving birth to babies. Okay, in the beginning, yes, we paid attention to the effects of things, the consequences. Is there going to be food for these children? Do you have the basic necessities for taking care of these children that you're churning out? churning out. So eventually, as I said, the conveyor belt started to malfunction, and it no longer worked. So it had to be replaced. So what our replacement was, when we recognized that there was an issue with giving birth, a lot of women were unable to give birth. Okay, so what did they decided to do? Force the process by introduction God, in vitro fertilization. Okay, in vitro fertilization introduction. That's what I was trying to say. I'm not going to re-record nothing. So what was happening is there was a sign when women started having infertility issues that there was an issue there. But instead of recognizing that, there was a need to leapfrog over the missing red flags to say, if you're having a fertility issue, that requires the stop giving births for a minute, or not for a minute, but for a while the so-called scientists took a deeper dive and find out what was going on. But no, instead we were forcing births after birth because what our religion said, we need to increase the population. And a lot of people are realizing why they wanted the population to be increased. And they realize when you genuinely deconstruct, you'll know why they were pushing out births. And this is all going to make sense because it's basic. This is basic. As basic as it can be. And a lot of people won't talk about it because of fear. Fear of losing their jobs, a fear of being doxxed is the word, shadow banned. I mean, this is basic. Okay, it ought to not cause that kind of fear. But since we've been so indoctrinated and not recognizing that we are supposed to self-educate ourselves, we're not supposed to have scientists actually educating us. They're supposed to assist us, but they're supposed to put out proper information, but we are responsible for disseminating it properly within. So with this conveyor belt theory is what I'm saying is there was an issue that was recognized decades ago, maybe centuries ago, that there was an issue with how women naturally gave birth. Okay? But instead of addressing that, they attempted to, implement other matters to keep pushing these babies out. And then it became where they weren't pushing them out, naturally coming through the birth canal. Instead, they considered this massive, dangerous surgery of C-sections is what it's called. Okay? Are you following me? I know you are. I know my young people will. I know my young people will. And this is enough for young people to understand, but you make that decision what you teach your children. Again, allow your child the opportunity to self-educate themselves and figure things out on their own. Okay, so there is no longer a birth canal. Births were not coming through the birth canal. A passage through which the baby is delivered, consisting of the cervix and the vagina. You see where I'm going? Instead of the natural process of through the cervix and vagina, which is what? A part of a biological woman. Now the majority of them are C-sections. You understand where I'm going with this. Okay, so I'm going to stop that right now for part 2, and I'll return shortly with part 3.